You don't lose big deals because your team doesn't know what to do. You lose them because everyone forgets what they know in the moment that matters. I want you to sit with that for a second because this isn't about training gaps and it's not about confidence. And it's also not about mindset. This is a retrieval problem. Under pressure, working memory collapses and the brain doesn't wait around for the best self to show up. It runs whatever code is cheapest. And 9 times out of 10, that's your oldest habit, not your newest skill. So today I'm going to show you exactly why your best people go backwards when the stakes are the highest and give you a 3-step playbook to keep yourself and your team performing at real capability, not your worst habits. We're also going to connect what you see in the boardroom to what cognitive science already knows about how people learn, remember, and perform under pressure. And I promise you, by the end of this episode, you'll never watch a talented leader choke the same way again. So let's begin. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Through candid conversations and expert perspectives, we dive into the challenges, breakthroughs, and practical lessons that shape exceptional leadership. I want to start with 3 scenes, and I'd be willing to bet that at least one of them is going to feel uncomfortably familiar. Scene 1, a senior leader walks into a board presentation, months of prep, and they have a strong presentation strategy. They know the material cold. And then the first hostile question lands, and suddenly they're reading their slides, word for word. The narrative disappears. The room goes flat, and this person, who is genuinely brilliant in one-on-one conversations, sounds like they're not even knowing their own deck. Scene 2, high stakes negotiation. The leader is well prepared, knows the walkaway number, knows the strategy, and then the other side pushes back harder than expected. And your leader starts talking faster, conceding ground they never intended to give up. The conversation they already rehearsed evaporates, and now they're just reacting. Scene 3, a major change initiative. Your senior leader has done the workshops, read the books, talks fluently about psychological safety and listening before directing. Then the change hits real resistance, real ambiguity, and within 48 hours, they're micromanaging every decision and issuing directives. Everything they learned about adaptive leadership is gone, just like that. Sound familiar? What you're watching in all 3 of those scenes is the same thing. It's called the reversion effect. Here's my definition. Under real pressure, leaders revert to their most overlearned habits, even when those habits are exactly what the situation does not need. And here's why it matters so much from a learning science perspective. The brain isn't irrational when this happens. It's actually being quite efficient, but exactly in the wrong direction. Okay, let's spend a few minutes on the science, because I think when you understand what's actually happening inside your brain, the playbook I'm going to give you in a moment will land very differently. 3 ideas: working memory, automatic habits, and transfer. Let's do each one fast. First, working memory. Think of working memory as your brain's active workspace. It's where you process an argument, read the room, recall your key message, adjust your strategy, and decide what to say, all in real time. That workspace is very limited. Most adults can juggle only a handful of elements at once, roughly 4 to 7. And here's what matters for leaders. Under pressure, that capacity shrinks. There's a well-established performance model in psychology called the Yerkes-Dodson law. The principle is simple. A moderate level of stress improves focus and performance. That's why a reasonable deadline can sharpen your thinking. But once stress crosses a certain threshold, performance drops, sometimes sharply. Cognitive control weakens, attention narrows, error rates increase. Now apply that to real leadership moments, to board presentations, executive reviews, investor calls. These environments often push arousal past the optimal zone. So what happens? Well, you walk into the boardroom with a clean 3-part narrative, then a hostile question lands, your heart rate spikes, your internal dialogue gets louder, and instead of tracking the room and advancing your message, your mental workspace is now occupied with threat detection. You didn't forget your narrative. Your working memory simply got hijacked. The whiteboard didn't disappear of your working memory, it got filled with something else. And that's why durable skills under pressure require more than just understanding. It requires automaticity and practice under realistic stress conditions. Now, here's where automaticity can become the villain. The skills you've practiced beyond good enough, practiced to the point where they run without conscious attention, are exactly the patterns your brain reaches for when your working memory is overloaded. Why? Because they're cheap. They don't ask much of a system that's already under pressure. If your early career survival pattern was control the details and talk more, the pattern runs with almost no cognitive fuel. It's automatic. Since it's been practiced thousands of times across years of high stakes situations, your brain already trusts it. Here's the third piece, and this one is maybe the most underappreciated in leadership development. Skills don't automatically jump from the training room to a high pressure meeting. There's a concept in learning science called situated cognition. The basic idea is this: your brain doesn't learn skills, it associates skills with situations. The context becomes part of the memory. So if you've only ever practiced executive presence in a calm offsite environment with a supportive facilitator, your brain has quietly filed that skill under offsite conditions. If we want skills to transfer, to actually show up when and where they're needed, we need to practice them across varied conditions. Under time pressure, with ambiguity, with unfamiliar stakeholders, the conditions that make the skill hard to use are exactly the conditions under which it needs to be practiced. All right, so here's the part I know that you came for. 3 steps, 1 simple framework rooted in science that we just covered. Preload the moment 24 hours before. This is not about getting your head right. It's not a visualization exercise or a power pose. I have nothing against those things, but that's not what we're building here. What we're building here is retrieval architecture. We're designing systems and conditions where your brain can actually access your best thinking when it's under pressure. I call this your one-page pressure script, and it has 3 components. Component 1, if-then lines. These are what learning scientists call implementation intentions. They're exactly what they sound like. If X happens, then I do Y. When you attach a specific cue to a specific behavior before the moment of pressure, you dramatically increase the likelihood that the behavior will actually fire when the cue appears. You're essentially preloading the decision so your overloaded working memory doesn't have to do it in real time. So, for example, if the conversation starts drifting into the operational weeds, then I restate the decision that I'm actually trying to make. You've already decided how you're going to respond. That's the leverage. You reduce cognitive overload in the moment by designing your behavior in advance. And that's how you build leadership responses that hold up when the pressure rises. Not, I'll try to stay calm, not, I'll try to remember to use this framework. No, a specific cue, a specific behavior written down and practiced. So, write 3 to 5 of these for whatever your upcoming high stakes moment looks like. Component 2, 3 key messages. Before you walk into the room, write down 3 sentences. Not themes, not bullet points, not talking points. 3 exact sentences that you intend to say. 3 ideas that absolutely must land, regardless of how the meeting unfolds. Here's why this works. This isn't good communication discipline. It's working memory management. When you pre-select and rehearse 3 specific sentences in advance, you're effectively budgeting your cognitive capacity before the pressure hits. Those messages become preloaded, compact, retrievable units that require far less mental effort to access. So instead of trying to think clearly in the moment, structure your argument, and wordsmith in real time, you've already done the heavy lifting. Your job in the moment becomes retrieval, not invention. And that distinction matters because under pressure, generating new language is expensive. Retrieving well-rehearsed language is comparatively cheap. Component 3, reversion behaviors to watch. You need to name your personal tells. What does your reversion look like? Maybe you speed up when you're under pressure. Maybe you default to defending your slides instead of selling your strategy. Maybe you go quiet. Whatever it is, name it specifically and write it down. You're giving your future self a monitoring cue, something to watch for in real time so you can catch the reversion before it's done the damage. So now you're in the room, the pressure is real, the mental whiteboard is starting to clutter. At this point, your job is not to be brilliant. Your job is to keep thinking, even as your nervous system is pushing you to react. Now, this concept has come from John Boyd, a fighter pilot who developed the observe, orient, decide, and act loop to help pilots operate effectively in high speed, high stakes environments. It's a way to interrupt that automatic reversion and create just enough space for your trained response to activate. Here's how it works in a leadership moment. The first step is to observe. Take one breath. What actually was said? What's the tone in the room? What's happening in your body? You're not solving anything yet. You're not defending. You're not responding. You're stabilizing your attention. The breath matters because it interrupts that reactive loop that prevents your oldest habit or pattern from firing automatically. The second step, the orient part. In that same breath, connect what just happened to your pressure preparation. Which one of your if then patterns applies here? Orientation is pattern recognition, not invention. The third part is decide. Choose one good enough move. The final part is act. Deliver one short, structured response. Lead with your key message. Anchor to one principle, then stop. Long, improvised speeches under pressure are where leaders lose clarity. I worked with a leader recently whose credibility in board meetings was eroding, not because she lacked expertise, but because of a stress pattern. When projections were challenged, she would defend by flooding the room with data. The more pressure she felt, the more granular she became. Spreadsheets, more data, assumptions, sensitivity tables. The result, complexity increased, but confidence decreased. So we built a pressure script around one simple if-then statement. If I feel the urge to justify a number, then I will lead with a financial principle before I go into the data. We also identified her reversion tell. The moment she started citing data, she had already lost her strategic altitude. So in the next board meeting, when the sharp question came and she felt that familiar pull toward data defense, she caught it, one breath, she observed, the board wants conviction, not complexity. She oriented, identified her trigger, decided instead to lead with a principle, and acted with two clean sentences, explaining the strategic assumptions driving the forecast. She stopped, the board response shifted immediately, not because her analysis improved, but because her pattern improved. That's this OODA loop under pressure. In practical terms, what you're doing is managing cognitive load in real time so that your best trained habits can fire instead of the oldest survival patterns. The final step, rapid debrief. Here's the brutal reality. If you walk out of a high stakes moment without a deliberate debrief, you've paid the full emotional price for that experience, right? The anxiety, adrenaline, post game overthinking, and you've captured almost none of the learning. So this is what I recommend, a 5-minute executive debrief ritual. 3 questions in order. What surprised me? Surprise is a signal of model failure. If you predicted the room would align and it didn't, that's data. If you expected pushback on pricing and you got pushback on questions like talent, that's data. Your leadership effectiveness is governed by the accuracy of your mental models. Surprise marks the exact point where your model needs refinement. Question 2, where did I revert? Under time pressure, you may overtalk. Under challenge, you may overdefend. Under ambiguity, you may overcontrol. Identify the exact cue that triggered the reversion. You are increasing awareness of the link between context and the automatic behavior. That awareness is what allows for redesign. And then question 3, what will I rehearse differently next time? Not will I be calmer, not will I communicate better. Once again, those are intentions, not practice plans. Instead, when a board member interrupts with a challenge, I will pause, restate the strategic objective, and then respond. Now you've created a deliberate rep for the next high stakes moment. When you repeat this process across varied contexts, board meetings, talent reviews, crisis calls, earnings preparations. You create spaced, interleaved practice across different environments. And that is exactly the pattern that research shows builds to durable transfer. So now you're not just gaining experience, you're upgrading your operating system. Over time, this compounds. The executive who reflects deliberately improves at an exponential rate compared to the one that is simply going to the next meeting. The leaders who perform consistently under pressure are not superhuman. They're not more talented. Instead, they've built learning architecture around their hardest moments. They understand that the reversion effect is real. They respect the limits of their working memory. They know the gap between I understand this and I can execute this under fire. And that gap is very real. So preload the moment before you walk in, run the loop when the pressure spikes, and design a debrief afterward so the learning compounds. That's not motivation, that's architecture. And over time, architecture beats adrenaline. That's how you outlearn the moment, and I'll see you next week. I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.